So we continue with cross-pollination. So we saw the advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination in the earlier video. Now we are going to see that what does nature prefer. The nature says, or we can say that the nature favors cross-pollination. It is always the cross-pollination which the nature would prefer, because it is going to be the evolution which is going to take place, biodiversity which takes place during cross-pollination. So, sorry. The vast majority of flowering plants are cross-pollinated. Some of the various devices or the conditions which favor cross-pollination are as follows. So you can see that most of the plants which you normally see are cross-pollination, and not only that, the plants are made in such a way, or the pollination के लिए there are certain kind of thing which is present in the plant which will not allow self-pollination to take place. So even if the plant is bisexual, it will not be able to do cross-pollination because of certain kind of nature of it. So you can see that the first thing is unisexuality. The flowers may either be male or female, and they may be born on separate plants. In this way, cross-pollination is the only possibility. So again, there will be certain plants which will be having only the male, the whole plant will have only male flowers, or have only the female flowers. So there is no possibility of you having a plant having both the male and female flowers. So what is the chance that there could be self-pollination? Zero. So that's why the first way the cross-pollination becomes a compulsion is the unisexuality. For example, palms, papaya. Papaya usually are separate male and female trees, but less frequently there may also be a hermaphrodite, that is tree bearing both kinds of flowers. In cucumber, gourd, etc., the male and the female flowers may be born on the same plant. So there may be certain which will be having the same plant, but the chances of self-pollination are rare. The next is dichogamy. Now, one important thing what I just read was hermaphrodite. Okay, hermaphrodite. Now, hermaphrodite is the one in which you have got the male and female trees, or you can say the plants having only male kind of flowers and the plant having only female kind of flowers. Dichogamy, different timing of maturation of androecium and gynoecium. So that is dichogamy. Dichogamy is the kind of property which a plant would be having, that its androecium and gynoecium will not mature at the same time. Because they are not maturing at the same time, so pollination is not possible within the same plant or the same flower. It needs to go for cross-pollination. So in many bisexual flowers, the anther and the stigma of the same flower mature at different times. In some plants, the anther of the flower mature earlier than the stigma, that is protendry, that is ladyfinger, sweet pea, salvia, sunflower. In some plants, the stigma of the flower mature earlier than the anther, that is protogyny. So protoendry means means first, androecium. So that is protendry, and whereas protogyny means first is gynoecium. So that is why the in this case the stigma matures earlier, that is protogyny. Proto first, gyne female. For example, custard apple, people. In either case, cross-pollination is the only possibility. The next is self-sterility. In this condition in which this is a condition in which even if the stigma receives pollen from the anthers of the same flower, the pollen fails to undergo further growth. In such cases, only the pollen from another flower of the same species can effectively complete the process of setting of the seed. That is, for example, lay floret of sunflower, orchids, etc. So you can see that in such kind of plants, it is such that they will be self-sterile. That means if the pollen grain of the same flower is going to settle on the stigma of the same flower, then it is not going to proceed any further. It will require the pollination to take place only by a pollen grain of another plant. Only then it is able to pollinate. Hercogamy, herco means barrier, mechanical or structural barrier. In some plants, the pollen of the flower cannot reach the stigma of the same flower. For example, a hood covering the stigma acts as a mechanical barrier in flowers of pansy or iris, etc. So in this case, there is a hood-like thing. So there is the flower, they enter यहाँ पे है और it's a hood जैसा है. Because of the hood over there, that is why it is not allowing the pollination to take place. So a hood covering the stigma acts as a mechanical barrier, as in case of flowers of pansy and iris, etc. And finally is heterostyly. In such flowers, the stigma and the anther grow at different heights, which does not favor self-pollination. That is in primrose, oxalis, etc. So in this case, if the anther is here and the stigma is over here, तो anther यहाँ से pollen grain इधर तक तो पहुँचेगा नहीं, right? So because of the difference in the height of the androecium and the gynoecium, there is no possibility of self-pollination taking place. So that's the reason you'll always find that the nature is always favoring the cross-pollination. Now we see the next part, and that is the agents of cross-pollination. The two commonest agents of cross-pollination are insect and wind. But some flowers are also pollinated by certain animals and birds like squirrels, bats, etc. or even by water in the case of some aquatic plants. Each category has some special features to maximize the chance of pollination. So you see that self-pollination or cross-pollination requires agents, and the agents are normally it is wind or the insect. But not only that, there are some aquatic plants which will require water as the source for our agent of pollination. And there are also some insects like bats, squirrels, they also help in the process of cross-pollination. So in this way, there are different, some or the other kind of property that particular plant will be having, which will support a particular kind of agent for its pollination. So either it could be wind pollinated flower or a water pollinated flower, or it could be a insect pollinated flower. So depending upon the different kind of agents, the flower will have certain characteristic features which will support that kind of pollination. So let's see that what is the properties of an insect pollinated flower. So insect pollinated or entomophilous, Entamo, insect, and phily is affinity. So entomophilous means affinity towards insects. So those flowers which has got the affinity towards insect is called as the insect pollinated or entomophilous. Insect pollinated flowers usually have the following characteristics. Firstly, the flowers are large. Yeah, they need to be large so that the insect has the possibility to enter inside the flowers. So that's why the flowers are large. They are usually brightly colored to attract insects. Yeah, obviously they are brightly colored so that they are attracted by the insects. Third, they usually emit scent for attracting insects. They give out a scent. They are giving out a scent. They are giving out that particular fragrance which allows or attracts the insect to come towards it. They produce nectar, which is the food for the insect. See, insect कब जाएगा फ्लावर के पास जब उसको कोई एडवांटेज रहेगा. So what is the advantage what they get over there is the nectar. Nectar is the food for the insect. So in search of nectar, in search of food, the insect is going to enter into the flower. That is why it is the food for flower. Fifth one, the pollen grains are sticky or spiny to enable them to be carried by the insect easily. See, if this particular pollen grains would be very dry, powdery type, what will happen? They will not stick to the body of the insect. So that's why the pollen grains in case of an insect pollinated flower needs to be sticky or it should be spiny so that they stick to the body of the insect. So when they stick to the body of the insect, that they can carry the pollen grain from one plant to another plant or one flower to another flower. And finally, is the flower tends to be clusters to make them conspicuous, especially in case of where individual flowers are small, like dahlia. So in case the individual flowers are small, then they will be in the form of a cluster, so that ऐसा feel होगा जैसे वो बड़ा flower है. So in case the flowers are small, then like in case of dahlia, the flowers will be in a bunch so that they will be attracting the insect more easily. So that was about the properties of the insect pollinated flowers. Now we see the properties of wind pollinated flowers. The wind pollinated flowers, also called as anemophilous. Okay, so anemophilous is the name. Entomophilous, insect pollinated; anemophilous, wind pollinated. Because anemo is wind and phily is affinity. Wind pollinated flowers usually possess the following special features. The flowers are small. Okay, the flowers will not be large because the insect don't need to come over there. It's just the wind which is going to carry away the pollen grains. So that's why it need not be large. They are usually not brightly colored and are often dull green. So yeah, they don't require it to be shiny and showy and bright colored because it is only the wind which is going to carry away the thing. So no need of any kind of insect attraction. So they are not attractive in nature. Neither they do not need to produce scent or nectar. Yeah, because no insect is going to come to them. So that's why they don't need any nectar or they don't need to have any kind of scent. But what is required is the stamen are long and hang out of the flower to be exposed to wind. For example, May. So here what happens is the stamen which is going to have the pollen grain in it, they are going to be long and they are going to be protruding outside the flower so that they can be easily carried away by the wind. So that's why the stamen will be hang out. It means they are going to be long and hang out of the flower to be exposed to the wind. So they should be able to be carried away by the wind. That's why they need to be up so that the wind can carry it away. So that's example is maize. The anthers are large and loosely attached to the filament so that a slightest wind may move them. They called as versatile anthers. Anthers are very loosely packed so that thoda bhi hawa aayega na to it should be able to move around, and that's why it should be able to throw away, or the wind can carry the pollen grains with it. So that's why they need to be large and loose. Okay, they should be loosely attached so that they are easily able to carry it out. Pollen is produced in a very large quantity. Yes, the pollen required will be in a large quantity because you can imagine that it needs to travel with the wind. तो wind तो कोई भी direction में जाएगा. तो जो direction में जाएगा अगर ज़्यादा quantity है तो only then it can reach any other flower which is there in the area where the wind is flowing. So it may be possible that wind जो direction में है वो direction में वो flower हो ही नहीं. So that's why a large amount of the pollen grains are required so that they are going to move around in the area and they can pollinate the flowers in that area. The pollen grains are light, dry and smooth so that they can easily be carried away by the wind. So yes, the pollen grain, the characteristics of the pollen grain will be, they cannot be sticky because if they are sticky, they will not be get carried away by the wind. So they need to be dry. Okay, they need to be dry, they need to be lightweight and smooth so that they can be easily carried by the wind. And at the same time, the stigma needs to be such that it can catch the pollen grain. So when the wind is coming by, wind के अंदर pollen grain है तो stigma उसको चिपका के दे सके. Okay, that is what is required for the stigma. So that's why the stigmas are feathery and hang out of the flower to trap the pollen grains. Okay, so their stigma will be feathery. Why will feathery? So that the pollen, when the wind is coming, the pollen grains get attached inside the feathery part and they hang out. They are upside. They are the flower यहाँ पे तो वो ऐसा hang out करेगा जिसके कारण जब air के अंदर the wind has got the pollen grains in it, the pollen grains get attached inside the feathery part of the stigma. So that was about wind pollinated flowers, that is anemophily. The next is wind water pollinated flowers, that is hydrophilous. Okay, hydro, water. So waterphily means affinity. So hydrophilous, that is water pollinated flowers. Water pollinated flowers are found only in aquatic plants. They have the following characteristics. Pollen grains are produced in large quantity, large numbers. Again the same problem. It has to be large because the flow of the water is going to be the only way the pollen grain is going to move. So it's not necessary that the pollen grains are going to be there in the nearby vicinity, and that's why the pollen needs to travel a long distances. So the more the quantity, only then it is possible for the plants to have pollination possible. So that's why large quantity of pollen grains will be required in case of water pollinated flowers. In some plants, the pollen grains have a specific gravity almost equal to that of water so that they remain floating below the surface of the water. Now, you can see that whenever, like upthrust में हम लोग ने physics में भी पढ़ा था, that if the density of the material is the same as that of water, it will be completely submerged inside the water. The body will be completely submerged inside water. So here also the specific gravity, that is the density of the pollen grain, is exactly equal to the water, so that the pollen grain is not floating above, it is floating under the water, so that जो पानी के अंदर जो फ्लावर है उसके अंदर वो आराम से pollination कर सके. In some special cases, the male flowers are such that they float on the surface of the water till they meet female flowers, that is Vallisneria. So in this case, there are certain kind of a plant like Vallisneria, the male flower will be floating on the water unless and until they meet a particular female flower. So that's how it is going to be in case of Vallisneria. Some flowers are pollinated by birds, that is called as ornithophily, that is ornitho is bird, like begonia and canna. So that is a different kind wherein you are going to have the pollination taking place by birds. Not only that, the pollination can also take by elephants. So elephophily is the pollination facilitated by elephants. It is found in Rafflesia, whose flowers are very large and are found at ground level. The pollen grains of one flower get stuck to the feet of the elephants and may get carried to the stigma of another flower when the flower gets trampled by the feet. So when the flower is getting completely smashed by the feet of the elephant, और elephant के एक feet के यहाँ पे अगर some pollen grain है तो वो दूसरे को उसका चिपकाएगा. But yeah, luckily that flower doesn't die because of the weight of the elephant. It just continues and the pollination takes place. And this is how the plant Rafflesia is going to have the pollination done with the help of elephants. That's why it is called as elephophily. Differentiation between the wind pollinated and insect pollinated flowers. So wind pollinated flowers, the flowers are unisexual, dull colored, without fragrance and nectar, whereas insect pollinated are brightly colored, fragrant and secrete nectar. Wind pollinated pollen grains are produced in large numbers, some go waste. Insect pollinated, less pollen grains are produced because they are transported mechanically by insects. Wind pollinated pollen grains are small, light and smooth. Insect pollinated pollen grains are large, sticky and spiny. Wind pollinated flowers, stigma long and hangs out of the petals, feathery or sticky, whereas the insect pollinated stigma often deep in corona and small. And finally, it's wind pollinated flowers, stamens long and protrude above petals like maize, grass, rice, wheat, etc. Whereas insect pollinated stamen are within corolla tube, and they're like China rose, salvia, pea, sunflower, etc. So this is about the differentiation between wind pollinated and insect pollinated flowers and the different kind of pollination. Now there is one more kind of pollination, and that is called as artificial pollination. So when man himself transfers pollen to the stigma, it is called as artificial pollination. In ancient civilization of Babylonia, it was a common practice to sprinkle male flowers of palm on the female flowers. Of course, at that time, they neither knew the sexuality of palm flowers nor anything about pollination. So yeah, in the olden days, they used to do this particular ceremony in which the palm trees का male flower को female flower के ऊपर sprinkle करते थे. But anyways, whenever somebody is taking the even kids also do that thing. They just move their hand around the walls or over the plants of the garden or somewhere. At that time, it may happen that they are touching one of the pollen grain of the flower, and when they go ahead, they are touching the stigma of the same flower, same kind of a plant, and hence you are doing cross pollination. Yes, it's possible that even you as a kid could have, when you were kids, you could have done this thing. Anyway, these days, artificial pollination, also called as artificial crossing, is a standard practice adopted by plant breeders and scientists in their efforts to evolve new varieties. So, you can see the new varieties, or as I give you an example of tulips and roses, you can see different varieties of roses and tulips nowadays in the market. This is mainly because the scientists, or you can say the agriculturists, they have tried many different varieties and they have interbreed species or interspecies का breeding करने का try किया है, so that they can get more and more varieties of that particular kind of a plant. So that's why they scientists, and it is their efforts to evolve new varieties. In fact, they remove the anther in young flowers, that is emasculation, and cover these plants with plastic bag. Later, they pollinate such flowers with the pollen from the plant of their desired variety. So what they do is that in some cases they even remove the pollen part. So pollen grain part, that is the emasculation they take place. The young plant में anther निकाल ही देते हैं. क्यों? क्योंकि pollination होना ही चाहिए. And then stigma के ऊपर उन लोग अपने desired variety का pollen grains को देंगे. So then accordingly the pollination will take place of their own species or own desired variety. Okay, so that is how they are going to, the scientists work on it, and that is why it is called as artificial pollination. Now there are some examples of pollination, so we just go through them quickly. In insect pollinated pea plant, the insect such as the bee alights on the conspicuous corolla. The bee thrusts its long tongue in search of nectar. In this struggle, the wing petals of the flower are depressed. The wing petals, along with the keel petals, are forced down, and the stamen and the stigma touch the underside of the body of the insect. If this insect has already visited another flower, it may have some pollen sticking on its body. The pollen is now transferred to the stigma of a new flower, thus affecting pollination. When the insect flies off, it may in turn carry some pollen of this flower to other similar flowers. However, if cross-pollination does not take place, there is every chance of self-pollination in this case, since both the stamen and the carpel are enclosed within the keel and are more or less at the same level. So that's what they are given us about the pea, about the sweet pea. You can see the sweet pea का जो flower है, the whole flower has got all the whorls. It has got the endoecium, gynoecium, as well as the corolla and the calyx. And the petals are of two types. One is the keel petal, that is a small one inside, and one is the wing petal, which is outside. So when the insect comes and settles on the wing petal, वो wing petal में आते वो wing petal थोड़ा depress होगा, नीचे आएगा क्योंकि उसके weight के कारण, and that's why the keel petal is visible. And when the keel petal is visible, you can see that the anther and the stigma are also coming in contact with the insect. So when and at that time, sitting on that, the insect is going to protrude its long tongue inside that in search of nectar, and when it does so, it is going to be going deeper inside the flower also, and that's why the stigma will be अगर वो plant insect के ऊपर already pollen grain है, there is a chance that the pollen grain can settle on the stigma of the flower, and or if it is not there, then the anther के जो ऊपर जो pollen grains है, that can sit on the stigma of the and it can stick on the insect. Even if there is nothing like this happening, still there is a chance that there could be self-pollination as the anther and stigma mature at the same time. So this is how the pollination could take place in sweet pea. The next is wind-pollinated flower maize. In wind-pollinated maize, pollination is brought about by wind. As the wind blows, the pollen from the outwardly hanging anther in the tassel is blown away easily because the anther are so loosely attached to the filament that the slightest wind will shake them. So, yeah, it is seen that the tassel, the male inflorescence is a tassel which has got a ऊपर पूरा bunch ऐसा है, or they are very loosely connected over there, so the anther are very loosely connected. So slightest wind can carry the anther with it. So that's why as a wind blows, the pollen from the outwardly hanging anther in the tassel is blown away easily because the anther are so loosely attached to the filament that the slightest wind will shake them. The pollen blown away by the wind may fall on the feathery stigma of the female flower, which has a large surface for this purpose. The male flower mature earlier than the female ones, so that there are less chances of self-pollination. So in maize, self-pollination is rare because the male flower and female flower are not going to mature at the same time. Anther is going to mature first, and the female is going to stigma or is going to mature later, and the female flower is going to mature later, and so the wind is going to carry away the pollens, and the styles which are there in a silk form that is there in the plant, that is going to attract or you can trap the pollen grains inside it, so that the pollination could take place by wind pollination. So this is how the wind pollinated maize flower can be pollinated. So that is the example given to you for insect pollinated flower, that is sweet pea plant, and the wind pollinated maize plant. Now we see what happens to the plant when the fertilization ends. What happens after the stigma and the pollen grain have combined with each other. When stigma comes in contact with the pollen grain, what happens next? And so what are the steps required for fertilization? So fertilization is the union or fusion of the nuclei of the male and the female gamete. So definition wise, it is the fusion, okay, it is the fusion of the male and the female gamete of the plant, of the flower. Male gamete is the pollen grain. So pollen grain contains two male nuclei, okay, the sperm nuclei. So that nuclei are going to fuse with the ovary के अंदर जो ovules है, the ovules के अंदर egg cell होता है. So it is going to fuse with the egg cell. So the sperm nuclei is going to get fused with the egg nuclei of the particular plant, and hence fertilization takes place. So fertilization is the fusion or union of the nuclei of the male and the female gametes. In flowering plants, the pollen grains produce two male gametes. The ovule inside the ovary produce the female gametes. Okay, so each and every pollen grain has got two male nuclei. Okay, they have got two sperm nuclei or the two male nuclei, two male gametes, whereas the ovule inside the ovary produces the female gametes. The pollen grain, the mature pollen grain is a cell with a double wall, the outer exine and the inner intine. So if you see any pollen grain, the pollen grain will look like something like this. So it will be an inner part and there will be an outer part. Okay, so this is the outer part, exine, and the inner part, intine. Okay, so outer part, exine, and the inner, intine. Its nucleus has already divided into a tube nucleus and a generative nucleus. So there are two nucleus inside. One is the two nucleuses. One is the tube nucleus, and the other one is the generative nucleus. Okay, so this way the pollen grain will be having two nucleus, the tube nucleus and the generative nucleus. At this stage, the pollen is transferred to the stigma, that is pollination has taken place. Further changes in the pollen grain occurs only if it is fallen on the stigma of the plant of the same species. So till the time the pollen grain is settled on the stigma, there is no change going to take place if there is of different two species. Only if this pollen grain is sitting on a stigma of the same species, then the further generation or the further kind of the processes is going to take place on the pollen grain. The next part is the ovule. Ovule is the inner part of the ovary. Ovule is destined to become the seed and the ovary is becoming the fruit inside the seed, consisting the seed inside. There may be a single ovule producing a single seeded fruit or many ovules producing many seeded fruit. Each ovule has one or two protective coverings, the integuments. The integuments leave a small opening called a micropyle at one end for the entry of pollen tube. So it's case that each ovule has got one or two protective coverings. So ovule has got a protective covering. There's an ovule that has got a protective covering and called as the integument, and that protective covering will be having one opening, and that opening is called as the micropyle. So micropyle is a small opening which allows from which the pollen grain can enter, pollen tube can enter into the ovule. Enclosed by the integument is the nucellus, a mass of food-laden cells, and the further inside the nucellus is the embryo sac. So this is how it works, the embryo sac. And so if you see the figure, it will be something like this. This is a figure of a pollen grain. So if you see the figure of the pollen grain, yeah, even in the case of pollen grain, once the we know that this particular kind of a pollen grain has settled on the stigma of the same plant or the same species, then from one particular side there will be a growth of a tube. So the tube nucleus which is over here is going to go forward and it is going to start developing a double walled tube like this, through which the two nucleus, ये दोनों nucleus इसके अंदर से जाने का चालू करेंगे, ऐसे अंदर जाएंगे. So the formation of the tube nucleus is going to be taking place by the the formation of the pollen tube is going to be done with the help of the tube nucleus. So tube nucleus is going to make a pathway. It is going to make a pathway for the sperm generative nucleus to go towards the ovule. Now when doing so, this particular generative nucleus is going to split into two sperm nuclei. So that's why when it is about to enter into the ovule, at that time there will be three nucleus. One nucleus which is generating the tube, that is the tube nucleus. And the two nuclei are the one which are formed from the generative nucleus. The generative nucleus is divided into two sperm nuclei. So that is why you will be having two sperm nuclei and one generative nucleus coming out from the pollen grain to enter into the style, and then from in the style into the ovule. So if you see the figure, okay, I'll just continue in the next video.